Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Edgar Villanueva, Vice President of Programs and Advocacy at the Schott Foundation. I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar today featuring the work of two key partners of the Foundation, the Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools and the National Education Association, the NEA. I will further introduce our partners in a moment. The Schott Foundation for Public Education provides grants along with communication, policy, and networking supports to various campaigns across the U.S. led by parents, students, teachers, and other advocates seeking to advance equity in our nation's public school system. We are witnessing a dismantling of public education in this country, really a dismantling of democracy in predominantly poor communities and communities of color. In some places, communities are even being denied the right to even vote for an elected school board, stifling out community voice in critical decisions impacting our young people. Decades of financial disinvestment in public schools is contributing to a narrative of failing public schools, leading to state takeovers and paving the way for privatization. However, the Schott Foundation has a core belief that a well-resourced grassroots movement can lead to systemic change in disparities facing our children. Please visit our website at www.schottfoundation.org for resources and to join our Opportunity to Learn network to stay engaged with these efforts. Now, we are thrilled to be a founding supporter of the Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools, led by Director Karan Blair. We are also joined today by Nate Gunderson, who is an organizer with the NEA. Karan and Nate will both share about various efforts that they are leading in the fight for the schools that all of our children deserve. We would like for you to stay engaged with us throughout the webinar, offering questions and comments over Twitter. Please tweet your questions to #ReclaimOurSchools. Later in the conversation, we'll have a time with a moderator to address your questions. Again, that's at #ReclaimOurSchools. Now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Karan and Nate to the conversation. Thank you very much.
Hello? Karan, you're on mute. I guess, go ahead, Karan, you're back.
All right. So thank you, Edgar, for that. My name is Karan Blair. I'm the National Director for the Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools. Our website is reclaimoursschools.org, and as Edgar said, you can join us on Twitter at Reclaim Our Schools, schools with SCHLS, or you can use the hashtag Reclaim Our Schools. So AROS is a 2-year-old alliance. We are unprecedented in a number of ways. Perhaps the most impressive is that the Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools boasts a membership of 10 national organizations that together represent and organize educators, parents, and students. That kind of national collaboration with shared tactics, shared strategies is tremendous because of both the reach that it allows us. Together we reach 7 million people. The Alliance is currently made up of the American Federation of Teachers, the National Education Association, the Service Employees International Union, the Center for Popular Democracy, the Schott Foundation, the Annenberg Institute, Gamaliel, the Advancement Project, the Alliance for Educational Justice, and the Journey for Justice Alliance. The breadth of this alliance, like I said earlier, is unmatched by any force on the right or even the left. So we stand really firm in our positions on public education because we represent the key stakeholders of this critical institution. Over the years, we have shaped a number of national priorities. For us, the first priority is advancing a positive vision of what schools can and should look like. We stand solidly in the camp that public education is a national good. In fact, it is a national treasure that is critical to our democracy, and that it is under attack, and that we have an opportunity to shape a narrative, to shape a vision of what schools should look like. So for us, We are fighting for the schools all children deserve. We demand that every school, every child should have access to a quality public school. We demand that schools should be well funded. We demand that schools should have in place positive discipline. There should be a focus on learning and not testing so teachers can teach and be creative. We think schools should have wraparound services such as counselors and medical support to mitigate the impact of poverty, right? So for us, that's our vision. It is not rocket science. These sorts of schools with a rich curriculum, teachers that get to teach, parents that are involved, young people that are not criminalized exist in many parts of this country, and where they are well funded and well resourced, they work and they work well. And so we think that every child in this country should have that kind of access and that kind of opportunity. So that's the first part of our work, to advance a vision of what schools should look like and point to where that vision is working and is being operationalized. The second piece of it, and Edgar mentioned this, is that we are clear that there is, in fact, a systematic attack on public education and largely public infrastructure. And so we are also committed as an alliance of 7 million people to push back against the movement to close and to charterize public schools. Right? We see this as problematic for a number of reasons. The first is that in many cases, right, these school closures occur in communities that are made up of Black and brown and poor folk. And so it becomes, if not intentionally in its impact, it is racist. And we have come too far as a country to allow that kind of policy making to continue. The second piece of our pushback against the expansion of the charter movement is that in many places they do not, in fact, outperform traditionally well-funded public schools. And the third piece is that they take money away from public institutions, right, which then push them into failure. We also think that private investors, private entities do not have a responsibility and a commitment to equity, and that is the role of our government. And so we think that the government should have a strong role in ensuring a system of well-funded, well-resourced, well-supported public schools that every child has access to. We're also, we come together to also lift up a demand again for racial justice and also for living wages, right? Because in a lot of places where we see the impact of poverty on education, right, we have people who are living in poverty who are then expected to perform in a classroom setting. And we know that poverty impacts learning. The folks on the other side of this argument would have us believe that what we need are super teachers, that what we need are more tests to close the achievement gap. And for us, we understand that we have to deal with the impact of poverty. We have to do more. We have to have well-qualified teachers who are allowed to teach, right, in order for schools to be successful. So again, the context of this is, and Edgar mentioned some of this, right? So over the last 20 years, we have witnessed a systematic attack on public education. Schools in predominantly urban areas that serve Black and brown folks have been defunded. That defunding has resulted in schools being deemed as failing. Failing schools are then closed. Then they're often charterized. We've seen this in places like New Orleans. We've seen this in places like Chicago. We've seen this in places like Philadelphia, right? Again, predominantly Black and brown communities being robbed of public education, the political impact of which is that Black and brown folks are robbed of the opportunity to even elect a school board, which we think, right, reverses national legislation that gave Black and brown folks the right to vote, right? So what have we come together to do, right? So we want to shape a narrative and a message around the good that public schools provide and how critical public education is to our democracy. As we see it, it is about educating kids, but it is also about preserving a democratic society where young people are taught and where learning allows them the opportunity to participate meaningfully, right, in our democratic society. So what we did in November of last year, we came together, we announced a national and coordinated effort to win the schools all our children deserve. In December, we brought together over 100 people from across the country, and we sat together and we planned this national effort. On February 17th, we coordinated what we call national walk-ins into public schools across this country. The first set of nationally coordinated walk-ins, and we had 40,000 people in over 40 cities in over 800 public schools across this country. That first set of action has led us now to May 4th, next week, where we will have another set of national walk-ins. This time we will be in close to 80 cities across the country. This tells us that there is, in fact, a growing movement, that there is, in fact, energy, right, being funneled into this idea that we must preserve public education as a national good. And we're not fighting for the status quo. We accept that in many places, Black, brown, young, and poor folk did not get the kind of public schools they have always deserved. So we're not demanding the status quo. We are advancing a vision instead of well-funded, well-resourced schools with a rich curriculum that is culturally relevant, with teachers that are equipped and well-trained, that have the opportunity to actually teach, with learning, not testing, with positive discipline, and with wraparound services that mitigate the impact of poverty. In the fall, we will continue to grow this movement, and we expect that we will plan, again, walk-ins, which Nate Gunderson will talk a little bit more about, in over 200 cities with the goal of engaging 100,000 people. This is really a movement moment, and we have the chance to preserve and to win and to retain a public good that secures our democracy and prepares young people to live fulfilling and thriving lives. And so we invite you into our fight. We invite you to journey with us as we work to win the schools all our children deserve. I'm going to turn it over to Nate, who will talk more about the tactics that we're using to push our narrative and our vision and to make these demands more public and more explicit.
So thank you, Garan. So what is a walk-in? We get this question a lot, but it's actually a fairly simple idea that is a very effective tool in terms of pushing a very positive message around how we want to fight back and reclaim public education. And what it turns out to be is it's people showing up early to work, about a half hour early. We invite educators, teachers, educational assistants, parents, and students to all gather in front of a school before the school day starts and to rally, picket, what have you, around their localized issues. So this is a national effort, but different localities are choosing different issues. Some places are anti-testing, trying to reduce testing. Some places are fighting hostile takeovers of their public schools by charter schools. Other places are advocating for more recess. Other places, so there's a whole host of issues that can be happening locally, but this is about reclaiming our public schools. And so basically people gather in front and before the school day starts, and then students, parents, and teachers, after a short rally, all walk in to the school together to reclaim the school. And it's an amazing media event because it's early in the morning and the media isn't doing anything, so we're able to get great coverage if we focus our press releases and our attention to get people out. But it's also an incredible way that we've been able to engage community and engage parents in a way that I don't think we have in the past. And so, for example, we started this walk-in idea in Milwaukee last spring. When state legislation was passed for a hostile takeover of the Milwaukee public schools, which, and we responded pretty quickly, and we had up to 40 schools do walk-ins in the spring. And then we did them again at the beginning of the school year in September, and we got to 110 schools. And then we coordinated with Arrows, and on February 17th in Milwaukee, we got to 130 schools doing walk-ins. And this was all in protest to the hostile takeover of the Milwaukee public schools. As a result, we have gotten public commitments from the commissioner that's been appointed to oversee this hostile takeover to do the minimum of one school that is required by law and then no more in the future, which, again, not a perfect solution, but probably the best solution we could have hoped for. But in doing so, we've been able to engage thousands and thousands of parents who have been showing up and saying, not one school, not my child. You are not going to make my child a commodity, an instrument of profit for the private sector. And we have been able to build relationships with parents and teachers through these actions, but it's also a very positive action. It's everybody sort of linking hands and walking in and reclaiming their public school. And one of the things that's been really effective is we've been able to build lists of parents at each and every school that participates. So it's a way that teachers and parents are starting to connect in a much more direct way to advocate around the issues that are mattering to the public around how schools should be run and what our demands should be. And so it's a mutual feedback loop that is helping to enhance the relationship. But we've also had places where we've had trouble getting teachers to lead a walk-in for whatever reason, or the students will do it. And so different places have been different. And it's a fun activity. Some students have done it with marching bands and drum lines. So we've seen a very, very positive sort of freedom amongst localities about how they approach this and how they want to do it. But it's helping build the movement. The other thing that I think is really important to notice is this is local to local, talking across the country. We have LA and Chicago and Milwaukee and San Diego and Seattle and San Francisco and New York and Boston. All of these different places are talking to each other about the same issues that they're struggling and working in a concerted way to elevate the narrative that we're going to reclaim our schools, that we are no longer going to allow our children to be turned into instruments of profit, and that these are our public schools and you can't have them. Sort of back on over. Is there other questions?
Karan, do you have anything else you want to add to the comments that Nate just made?
No, I mean, those are good, and I just want to echo them, right? Again, we want to lift up for the folks on the Hangout. I almost said webinar, but in the Hangout that, the walk-ins are part of a larger strategy, and for us, in order to win, we have to, again, advance our vision. We have to do high visibility actions that cause people to say, what is going on and why does this matter? And so folks are able to participate in walk-ins. The cities and the locations, if they're not on our website yet, reclaimOurSchools.org, they will be there. We encourage folks, if you want to be involved, the very simple step is to go to our website and join our mailing list, right? So you can know when activities are happening nationally. We have tables in close to 20 cities, coalitions in close to 20 cities across the country. So it is presumable that folks can get connected to a local coalition. But by and large, if you're out there listening to this, you can go to our website, reclaimOurSchools.org, join the mailing list, and which for us is a way of raising your hand to say, I'm in, I support this vision, and I'm ready to do what it takes in order to win the schools all our children deserve.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I just would like to add, we also, on the Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools website, there's a resource link, and if you click on that, if you want to set up a walk-in in your locality, there is about 20 different downloadable and edible tools, posters, flyers, how-to planning sheets, how to actually reach out and do this, and how to construct the event, that in the future, as Karan said, we want to build this into September, where we have over 200 localities doing it. And this can be parent organized, this can be student organized, this can happen at community colleges, this can happen all over, wherever public education is under attack. It doesn't just have to be K-12. And so we have a resource guide that really helps you plan out and make a successful walk-in. And so we invite you to join us in trying to figure that out and participate on May 4th. We will have up on the Arrows website the list of cities that are participating. So please join us next week. Come and be at a walk-in. It's a beautiful thing. It feels beautiful. It's beautiful to feel powerful. It's beautiful to feel united. And so we ask you to come and be beautiful and walk into schools and reclaim public education with us.
Thank you. I do see some questions that are being posted from the viewers, so we can take a look at a couple of those. The first one says that communities with a lower tax base generally receive the short end of the stick where funding is concerned. So how do we actually change the dialogue to engage or create greater empathy with those who are least affected by these inequities? You guys have any, or otherwise, I hear some folks refer to this group of folks as the movable middle. So, do we have any thoughts about how to engage folks who are not as impacted sometimes by these inequities?
I would like to give the example of Wisconsin. So the, Karan alluded to earlier that the primary targets of these hostile takeovers and the privatization attempts are in black and brown communities, and so, and which is true with the hostile takeover of Milwaukee. But the way the legislation reads, right, so they've racialized the issue and they've gone after lower tax-based communities, but what's going to happen is the legislation actually allows them to expand it. So what I would say to the movable middle is you're next. After they successfully dismantled public education in places where they think they have more political power, they're going to come after other localities. They are going to try to, this is their giant honeypot. They believe this is public funding that they can privatize. Like, they are going after it, and so you're next. And so it's very important that you get involved and you stand up for what has long been a right in this country, that every kid has access to public education, and now that is threatened.
Karan, do you have any thoughts?
So a couple of things come to mind, and the work of AROS, right? When we think about the 7 million people that we have access to that are impacted, a part of our priority is to move those 7 million people, right? So we are focusing on the folks who are impacted, primarily because in this case we are in the majority. So that's the first piece of our strategy. It does not, however, ignore this movable middle, and I echo what Nate said, because if we don't have public schools, we enter, I think, into an economic crisis, right? And all of a sudden, the movable middle becomes the impacted many. Right. So, right, if young people are not getting access to schools that prepare them to actually be meaningful and contributing members of our society, that ultimately impacts all of us, right? And so there needs to be some concern. And then, like Nate said, this is global, right? When we look at places like South America, the Caribbean, like, there are places where public education is being dismantled and everyone is being impacted. And if that is any indication of what is happening in America, then none of us are safe, right? None of us are in a position to say, well, this will never happen to me. But by and large, the impacted folk, right? Again, teachers, parents, students, millions of people who are served by these schools are the folks that we're trying to agitate to say, if we take action together, we could build a powerful force that says you go no further with taking away this public good.
Thank you. There's a question about how businesses might be included in this action or in this fight. Specifically, it says how is business being included from small to corporate, especially those who are located in or near areas with affected schools. Any thoughts about that?
So again, what we are building is a wide table. So in a lot of our local affiliates, right? If folks are if you're on the call and folks are interested in being a part of our work, it is simply going to our website, signing up, looking at your city or your state to figure out where, if a coalition exists, and if it does, reaching out to those local folks to say, hey, I want to be an advocate for public education, use my voice, use my resources, I'll put my body, right, at a rally where it's needed, because that's where we are right now. So everyone has an opportunity to participate because of how wide and how deep these tables are.
Thank you.
And I would just like to add, so we have a coalition table in Milwaukee that allows for anybody to come and get involved, because basically when public schools are under threat, the economic vitality of the city is under threat. And so we invite people to be involved because, quite frankly, oftentimes the public school districts in a major metropolitan area is one of the largest employers around. And when that is threatened, the economic vitality of the city is threatened. And so small businesses, local businesses should be very, very interested in getting involved and putting pressure on in many dynamic ways. I mean, they can participate in the walk-ins, but they can also be involved in these coalition tables to say, hey, it's not okay to come after our public schools. It's not okay to commodify our kids, right? And be able to put economic and political pressure on those power brokers that are going after our students and our schools. And so, join a coalition table in your locality. As Karan said, go to our website, but also take a look. Like in Milwaukee, we have Schools and Communities United, which is, we're associated with Eros, but we also reach out to local businesses and ask people to get involved, to stand up and protect the city of Milwaukee, because we know that if the public school system goes down, then Milwaukee itself is threatened.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Another question is it possible that for some teachers there may be a conflict with their contracts to participate in this? And as a follow-up related question, what is the best way to inform the school of a walk-in that may be occurring, or do we all just show up at the school? What's the best way to approach some of those logistical, activities?
Again, go ahead, Karan.
No, I'll let you, Nate, because this is your area. So I will. You've organized a number of walk-ins. I think you can speak more to this.
Yeah, if you could repeat the question slightly again, but just basically, how do you approach organizing a walk-in and the logistical tools to making it happen? Am I stating that correct?
I think so. Maybe a two-part question around the logistical tools of making it happen. Do you inform the school or do you just show up? And then I think the other part of the question was, could there be a conflict for some teachers, with their contracts to participate in a walk-in?
So, answer the second question first. No. I don't think there's anything illegal about showing up to work early anywhere. That's part of the beauty of this is actually it's very non-confrontational, although it feels very confrontational, right? But it's not a strike, right? It's people showing up to work early and walking in and embracing their public schools and saying, I love it. Not to say that we haven't run into opposition from school administrators and principals along the way. But at the end of the day, what are you going to do when parents and teachers and students want to walk into school together when these are public buildings? So, and quite frankly, what's their criticism? It's people showing up to show their support and love for their local public school, maybe with a demand, but again, it's about embracing the school. In terms of logistically making it happen, we do, there are no secrets when you are organizing public actions, right? So school administrators know that we do this. And sometimes they join us. In Green Bay, Wisconsin, they joined us for the walk-in. There are places throughout the country where principals will come out and actually have other administrative staff join us for those walk-ins. But there's other places where, like in Chicago on February 17th, they I want to say Claypool, and correct me if I'm wrong, but sent out a letter to parents saying don't participate in this, and that it was civil disobedience, and tried to define it as a hostile act, which actually we believe increased turnout. But again, what are you going to do? And I don't understand. We haven't received any discipline anywhere in the country for doing this. Contractually, there's been no problem. But again, it's public space, it's freedom of speech, and people are showing up early for work and walking in with students and parents. And so those things are good. I also, we do suggest to invite your principals out and to invite other administrators out and school board members out. In many localities, school board members have joined us because these are the things that they're fighting for and they're feeling the pressure. And so it's great when you can create a unified front around these issues. And sometimes it's not your local school board that's the problem, right? Sometimes it's the state legislator. Sometimes it's hostile, corporations who are trying to, commodify our children and institute charter schools. So so I think logistically, we do inform people and we do tell them, and then we invite them. We've worked in Milwaukee to finally get the school system itself to actually send a flyer home with students to inform their parents. But that took us till the third try, right? The first time they looked at it as a total hostile event, but as they saw that we were really out to try to save the entire public school system, they started to understand that. They were much more likely to get involved, and the school board itself started to come out to many, many events.
All right, another question is, one viewer says their community is mightily challenged by race. The organizers there, who are predominantly white leaders, are woefully unprepared to partner in meaningful ways with communities and parents of color. How could you or we support our predominantly white leader organizers in this county?
Hey, Edgar, say that one more time. I had a hard time hearing you.
So one of the questions is asking about how to support organizers that are predominantly white, who appear to be woefully unprepared to partner in meaningful ways with parents of color. So in this county, they say they have a race challenge, and most of the organizers are actually white folks. Any advice for those organizers?
So for me, the advice is training, right? And I think of this in a sort of more holistic way, right? If an organizer is unprepared, then how do we train up that person to do the work in the community which they're working in? And I to speak more specifically to it, I would invite that person to reach out to us, so we can have a conversation about, what it takes to build on the ground, and if there's a way that EROS and the EROS infrastructure could be supportive, we would love to figure that out. But again, I think for me, the answer is always, I've done work in communities that did not look like me, did not have the same background, but when I was equipped and trained and culturally competent, I was able to do effective work. And I think there's always room for a conversation, right, with organizers to say, hey, here's what's not working, here's what's ineffective, here's what we think would be better. Because the goal of organizing is to build relationships that build power. And if there isn't trust in either the ideology of the organizer or the skills, then that's going to be really difficult to accomplish the goal of the organizing effort.
That's great, thank you. Another question was, let me see here, lots of questions coming in, keep them coming. There was a question about the use of a national petition. Is there a national petition that is broken down by state, county, or city? And if so, how is that being used? If there is no petition, have there been any thoughts about starting one?
Yeah, so we released on February 17th a national petition that folks were able to sign on to, again, because a lot of our tactics in this first phase is about building a community of fighters, if you will, right? So on May 4th, we'll also have a national sign-on. It will not be broken down in the sort of demographic way that you just mentioned, but it will be, again, for us to build a national list of supporters who understand our work. And then we can work with folks locally to build those kinds of petitions if there is a campaign they're running for which signatures and names on a petition would be useful and effective.
Thank you. This is a nice question. Could you both describe an anecdote from a previous walk-in? So was there something really special that happened, maybe a funny story, something very powerful that you would like to share from your last experience?
So I live in Chicago, and I was at a school on the west side of the city, and this school serves predominantly young folk who have who deal with different forms of disabilities, and the young folks were there, the parents were there, and I had the opportunity to talk with one parent, and she wasn't in tears, but she was really passionate. And the thing she said was, she said they thought that these kids were the disposable ones, that they're doing this to us because they thought that if we're going to attack the most vulnerable because they won't fight back. And that day in Chicago, there were at least 300 people at that school, parents, students, teachers, community members. And she talked about how very powerful it was for her to watch as a community came out to say this school is valuable to us. What it does for the young people that attend this school is too critical for us to allow the state to not fund it. And so it was both a testament to the value of that public school, but also to the resilience of a community that was deemed too vulnerable to fight back. And it was encouraging for me to watch them fight back and be encouraged by the work that they're doing. So that was really powerful for me on February 17th.
I had the pleasure to be at a walk-in Milwaukee, and I mean, not as specific as Quran, but to actually kind of show how beautiful this movement can be. So we're again in Milwaukee. They're dealing with a hostile takeover of the public schools, and we had a chant, not one student, not one school, and it took about 3 seconds before the students there, and there were hundreds of them, took over the chants. And they took the banner away from the teachers, and they're the ones who led the march around the school. And they're the ones who took ownership over the fight, and they're the ones who actually led the walk-in into the school. And they took and so, do not undervalue or undercount what the youth can do and how much value they see in their school. And so this isn't just an adult activity, right? This is something that is incredibly powerful when the youth get involved. And so I just found that to be a really sort of telling moment where we thought we were kind of in charge, and the students said, nope, we got this. We got this. We know what's at stake, and we're going to take it. And so, I don't know, that's a good one for me.
There we go. Sorry about that. Another question I think is really around the impacts of all of this work and thinking about economic impact. The viewer asks, are you also illustrating impact beyond those employed in education? A weakened school system equals less prepared future post-secondary students and a workforce. So how are you incorporating that into your analysis and narrative?
Well, I mean, it is part of our conversation that we're having, right? That, to the first question around those who are not impacted, like my response, again, like I said, is I'm not sure who isn't impacted by this, because if we do not have a well-educated population, so much is at stake. Our economy is at stake. Our democracy is at stake, right? We lose a lot when we disinvest. And that argument works, but it reminds us then that in this country, there's always been a set of people, predominant Black folk, brown folk, folks of color, poor folk, who have been allowed to suffer even in the midst of economic problems, right? So we want to talk about how logical it is, how much sense it makes, but we understand that it is not just reason, that it is systematic, and that the folks on the other side are aware of that. And there is a cost that they've calculated, I think, to say, well, in Chicago last year, for example, 34 people went on a hunger strike. And when Eros got involved with that fight, and we looked at the proposal they had submitted, we looked at the process they had gone through to develop their proposal, and we looked at the other proposal that the city was considering, in my mind, I went, right? How on earth is this even a conversation about which of these schools or these proposals should be accepted? And then you realize that they were fighting for a high quality, well-resourced school for Black folk on the south side of Chicago, and that makes all the difference. So we want to locate and root the conversation in some deliberateness and not in sort of haphazard, oh, we're not sure what's going on, right? So we want to make sure that we understand that there is something deeply racial or racist about what is happening, and that we have to call that out and fight on those terms if we are to be successful.
And I would just like to add that, so in Milwaukee, the Milwaukee Public Schools, so there's state legislation mandating the takeover of a minimum of 1 to 3 schools in year 1, 0 to 5 in year 2, and 0 to 5 in year 3. This is state mandated legislation. What people don't often understand is that because of voucher schools, 54% or 44% of all school-age children actually don't go to public schools right now. They actually go to voucher schools in Milwaukee. And so the school system itself is teetering on the edge of insolvency and not being able to exist. And this state legislation, which seems like, oh, they're only going to take over 1 school, is actually, we're 4 to 5 schools away from the entire Milwaukee public school system being, threatened for insolvency and not being able to support itself, which is a massive problem for the greater Milwaukee County area because A, Milwaukee Public Schools is the largest employer in the city, but B, it then creates a pension liability on the city pension fund, which can no longer be met, which C, puts the city in a position of possible bankruptcy. And that's not accidental, right? This attack on the public schools is an attack on trying to privatize all sort of public goods within the city, and they see.
Yes.
And so it's been really important for us to frame the narrative in that way, right? And why is it that they are coming again after a predominantly Black and brown community, right? Because the fact of the matter is they're going to do this in other localities where people are whiter, right? But they're going after populations that they think won't fight back or aren't prepared to, and they're wrong. We're winning the fight back in Milwaukee, but it's really important that we talk about the fight in these ways, that the impacts of attacking our schools aren't just accidental, and they're done under the guise of trying to help kids, right? And it's the farthest thing from it, right? These charter schools don't outperform public schools, even when they get to cream kids off the top and push kids out that have special needs and push them back into the public schools without the funding, without the per pupil financing that happens, right? Because that's what they do, right? They cream off the top and then they push the kids back in, which means parents of kids with special needs are not getting the services that their children need, right, as a result of this. So we have to talk it in a much broader way because it has massive economic impact, but it also has, it's just gross. It's icky that they would be willing to commodify our children to such a degree that kids with special needs will be denied essential services because the system can no longer afford it because somebody else took the money.
Absolutely, thank you. So another question is regarding the opposition and the privatization movement that is sweeping the country. What we are seeing in some places is that movement is growing fast and is getting smart around organizing, and in some cases actually recruiting people of color from low-income communities to be a part of that movement and to be the face of that movement. How do we begin to address that dynamic and push back against that and help really communicate to those folks what's really going on?
So I think when I think about organizing, one of the things I always say before I came to Eros, I was a trainer at the Midwest Academy, and I would say to people, in a fight like this, what you got to do is you have to focus on your base, on your people. You have to build, right? Because it is in building that you neutralize the other side. So for us, again, I keep coming back when we think about Eros and all of our partners, we can reach 7 million people. So for us, we have to raise up. When we think our solution to takeovers and to closing schools is what we call sustainable community schools. And so for us, we are building an apparatus that allows us to lift up the parents and teachers in these schools to say, this is the model, this works, right? We're seeing more and more folks out of the charter industry saying, I'm not sure this is the right way. I think our side also has Diane Ravitch, who really was the architect of some really bad policy, now saying, hey, that was a failure. So we have to identify the folks who believe as we believe, lift them up so that they can tell their own stories, and then find folks who witness the other side who are willing to say, hey, that is not working. And there are a lot of people who are recognizing that model, which again, some people could argue was rooted in some real good intentions around what we do for kids who are not being served well. And you know, we can't always argue intent, but we can argue impact, and we can say there are people who are now realizing that impact is not good and that we have to go another way. And so finding those voices, elevating them, right, to the national level, so that we begin to shape the conversation, and that is precisely a part of the Aero strategy.
I would just like to also echo that the opposition is incredibly well funded and incredibly savvy, right? But you know, what I think a lot of people don't know or quite understand is a lot of this comes out of sort of the out of Silicon Valley and sort of educational product development for online learning, blended learning, right? There is this deep, deep desire to attack public school systems and hopefully make them unelected and undemocratic, so they can actually sell their product to a vendor or to an individual employer instead of having to negotiate with school boards about what sort of educational product they're delivering. And we know, like say in Minneapolis in the last year, you know, over $1 million came into a local school board race out of Silicon Valley, right? And so people need to start asking the question, why is that happening, right? And you know, so we don't use these terms of commodification of our children lightly when we talk about it. You know, there's actual evidence that they're really interested in creating an environment where kids sit and engage in laptops and screens all day long and fill in bubbles on tests, because that's their product that they're pushing and that they're selling, and they're using our kids as a way to peddle that stuff. And so they've gotten very sophisticated in how they're mobilizing and coming after school boards and trying to fund candidates that are going to support those sorts of things. So just don't, you know, people shouldn't be under an illusion that this is, you know, that it's what's good for kids. It's about how they can make money off of our kids. And so, you know, like to highlight that.
No, that's great. Thank you. See, so many questions coming here. This is a good one. So the public school takeover, that's underway in Atlanta right now seems directly connected to the regentrification taking place in the city proper. How is the coalition building continuing with local groups to resist such efforts like gentrification, and how it's all connected to school takeover?
Wait, say that one more time, Edgar. Sorry.
So the question makes a link to gentrification and school takeover. Specifically in Atlanta, they bring attention to what's happening there with privatization and gentrification happening in the city. How is the question is, how is the coalition building continuing with local groups, for example, Rise Up Georgia, to resist such efforts locally?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, what I can say to that is, you know, we are supportive of the work that is happening in Atlanta and in Georgia, and I am no expert on the local dynamics, but the kinds of connections that the question asker makes around gentrification, around race, like for us, all of these things are connected, and our strategy involves how we push back in a holistic way, in a coordinated way that recognizes that, again, like Nate said, there is something more nefarious going on in terms of how we commodify schools, how we commodify Black and brown bodies, right, in order to make profit. And on the other side, there is a sort of by any means necessary sort of approach. And I do think that the gentrification problem is also part and parcel of that.
You know, and I also say that there's you know, from the teacher union perspective, you know, we have to get more savvy around gentrification and racialized issues. And part of being with Eros is really trying to shift the narrative and how we engage and partner in communities and start to take these issues on head on and not talk around them. And I just think it's really important. I think the question is a great question because I think it's happening in major urban areas everywhere. I don't think it's just specific to Atlanta, although the takeover in Atlanta right now is incredibly hostile and incredibly nefarious. But that's also happening in LA. That's happening in San Francisco. That's happening in Oakland. That's happening in Chicago. That's happening in Minneapolis. It's happening everywhere. And so it's really important that we take this stuff on and we talk about it. And that and that we're not afraid to actually address some hard issues that people don't always want to engage in. I think it's we're going we have to be honest and tell the truth if we're going to win. And so we have to talk about some harder issues that we don't maybe always feel so comfortable with.
Absolutely. In organizing, we're told to name the target, to name the opposition. So one of our questions is from a viewer is, who is the opposition that we're talking about on this call?
You want to take a stab, or you want me to do it?
I'm gonna let Nate.
I mean, from the national education, I mean, at least from my perspective, the opposition is actually the corporatization of public education, right? And I think you can define that in a lot of ways, and you can understand how that fits into a power analysis in our free market capitalist society, right? But I think that there is the opposition in lots of ways is those who are looking to turn a profit on our kids, but the profit actually comes from our tax dollars, right? It's not just because they do things better. They're actually taking our tax dollars to make money, right? And instead of taking our tax dollars to make sure all our kids have a roof over their head and making sure that all the kids that go to school have health insurance and have food on the table every day and living in a stable environment where guns aren't rampant on the street and available to everybody else, right? Like there are social decisions being made here about and our students are right at the center of it, and there is a desire to turn a profit off the public money that we spend on our kids to make their lives better. I mean, I think we just saw yesterday, was it Paul Ryan who said that free breakfast leaves kids' souls empty, right? These are our national elected leaders talking that we should get rid of free lunch and free breakfast programs in our schools, right? When we have, I think over 50% of the kids in the public schools in this country live in poverty, right? So, I'll let the viewer or whoever asked the question define who the opposition is, but that's how I frame it.
So I was smiling because this is taking me back to my old days of training. So there are two things I would lift up. There are the targets, and for me, the targets are the folks who have the ability or the power to make the decisions we want made. And so in a lot of places, our targets are actually elected folks, right? Folks that we put in office. And what we must build is a grassroots movement that can impact the political situation in a local context in such a way that we can bend the political will of these officials, whether they be the school board, whether they be the city council, whether they be the state legislature, right? So we have to build, and for us, power will look like numbers. Can we mobilize enough people who say, I'm a public education voter? Like, what I want to know is, what is your position on what we do with public schools? So in a lot of places, those are the targets. Again, the people who have the ability or the power to make the decisions that we want, meaning they could say, we're going to give, like the mayor of New York, we're going to give millions of dollars to this idea of sustainable community schools. They could, like the city council in Cincinnati, say Cincinnati will be a community school district, right? They could, like the mayor in Newark, say we're going to fund community schools as our turnaround model. Targets. Then the opposition for us, as Nate sort of indicated, is a network of well-resourced corporate reformers. So they look like the Broad Foundation in LA. They look like the Walton Foundation. They look like in Chicago, the unelected school board that is appointed by the mayor, who stand in direct opposition to what the people of Chicago want. It is critical, though, in organizing that we understand both the nature and the composition of the opposition, but we do not focus there. We figure out who the decision makers are and what it will take to build power to bend their political will. And that's what we're doing with the kind of grassroots movement that we're building at Eros, because we know that if we can identify enough people who have the power to vote in or vote out, vote on a set of issues, who have the power to walk in, walk out, opt out, shut it down if we must in order to get the schools we want, then we can build the power necessary, given our political structure, that moves our demands in a positive direction.
Thank you. One final question, and before we wrap up today, this has been really fun. I feel like we should do this like once a month. But the question is, what is the best way for parents and youth to connect with local teacher unions and organize together, especially if there has been some antagonism in the past?
That's a great question. I mean, the best way is actually, call the local and reach out to it, and call the local with a purpose, not just like I want to help, but we want to do something on this particular issue. And if you're a parent or your students, actually, mobilize a little power to, especially if there's been, contention in the past, saying, hey, we've got 5 or 10 parents together that want to do something. And we want to work in conjunction with the teachers union to make this demand happen at the school district. St. Paul, in this last year, there was an attack on a music school and music funding, and the parents all got together, and they didn't want to lose some of that funding for their students, and they reached out to the St. Paul Federation of Teachers and said, would you help us mobilize and work together on this? So again, it can be a school-based issue, it can be a citywide issue. There's all sorts of ways for parents to get involved and students to get involved. And then trying to bridge the gap, and relationships are always fluid, and so don't always make past transgressions. Teacher union leaderships also flip over a lot. They change every several years. Oftentimes term limited out, and you have new leadership come in. So don't let a necessarily negative past experience influence or sway you from trying to engage and get a local affiliate to work together with you around students that best, around issues that best help kids.
I love that answer. We're doing some work right now to build in Denver, and I have the privilege of working with the folks there. And one of the first questions I ask people, because the indiscretions come up and the challenges come up, and I say to people, tell me what is at stake, right? Say in 5 years we do not build together. What happens, right? And I get people to sort of go 5 years, 3 years into the future to imagine the alternative. And then I say to folks, is that world where we don't get to build together, is that worth fighting for, right? Or to flip it, imagine if we build together and we win together. Is that world worth all of the trouble of trying to figure out some of these relationships? And the answer is always yes. So for me, the first step in the process of building is acknowledging what is at stake and asking the question, is what we could win together worth all the trouble? And if the answer is yes, and that's where we start. If the answer is no, wait till next year. In most cases, though, the answer is yes, because we are under attack, and when we are at war, we have to sort of maneuver ourselves in very different ways. The other piece to add to what Nate said is that the goal of Eros is to build these sorts of coalition. And we, again, what is unprecedented about our work is that we boast relationships and connections to the 2 big teacher unions, right? And so our folks at the national level folks like Nate, there is a commitment to, if there is a local community that wants to organize, we want to work with you to figure out how we can help to move some of those relationships. So if it seems untenable from the local perspective, then reach out to us and let's have some conversations about who we can connect you to at the national union that could help, not forcefully, but that could help maneuver some of the relationships on the local level. And we've done that in a number of cities, and it has worked very well. So that would be the thing I would add.
Thank you. Well, we are out of time. I want to thank everyone again for tuning in today. Thank you for your great questions. Sorry for not being able to get to all of them, but I especially want to thank again Nate Gunderson from the NEA and Karan Blair from Arrows. And once more, we would really love for everyone to participate. Please join Arrows. Go to www.reclaimingOurSchools for resources and additional information about the walk-ins on May 4. We hope to see you all in a school near you. And we also invite you to go to the Schott Foundation website, www.schottfoundation.org, to join our Opportunity to Learn network. Again, Karan, Nate, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We look forward to the good reports coming out of the walk-ins on May 4.
Thank you so much.
Right.
All right.
Awesome.